me. My name is Felipe, and I'll be chatting about building command line apps for you, your team, and everyone else. So from this squiggly handwriting, you can tell that this isn't a fancy enterprise grade, cloud-powered 10x Haskell Rust talk. We won't be deploying Kubernetes today. We won't be dealing with Docker or AWS anyway. What we are going to do is just share some stories about different tools that I've been writing for the last maybe 12 to 18 months. And this is mostly grounded in my day-to-day work as a platform engineer on our client side, but it's not strictly all just sort of super centered around my work. Well, there we go. My goal is that after this talk, this quote should be you. You should be happy to go off and write some script, and you'll tell yourself that it's worth it to experiment and play with it. And most importantly, I really want you to have fun with any experiments and fun ideas that you want to write. You can tell that I've already had fun sort of sketching and squiggling these out. So without further ado, let's dive in. But don't worry, like the Olympic athletes that we just saw in Tokyo, we're not here to make a big splash. Feel free to raise your hand whenever you want. I'll do my best to keep an eye on it. Otherwise, unmute yourself and ping me anyway. So these are the tools that we'll be talking about. Well, I've broken them down into the three categories, myself, my team, and everyone else. All of these have been influenced by me in one way or another. Either I'm the author, or my team worked on it, or I've had some influence on it. So the myself group, that is probe, journal, and story, are clearly written by me, for me. They show personality, they show my pet peeves, and I'm pretty sure there are better solutions out there to these exact problems. The second category is ToolChain and SecHub. Those are tools written for my team, and those will probably be run by someone else, probably someone close to me, but like, yeah, it's sort of one step detached from me. And lastly, the category where like the end of ToolChain feeds in and DDEvent is for everyone else. These are tools that will be run by people pretty detached from me. They might be on a broader account, but not in my own team. Or as we'll see with DDEvent, might even be scripts or lambdas. You can tell by the gray blob around ToolChain that spans my team and everyone else that this is not a very strict divide. Certain tools start off on the myself side, and they slowly progress and maybe regress again as like a problem disappears, or as we'll see later, they might disappear entirely. It's important for me to say that all of these tools orbit my work, so I can't show you demos of it, but I have taken plenty of screenshots and sort of gently blurred out any client details that are important. So let's talk about the first tool and my favorite tool, which is Journal. Journal takes my daily morning routine and fully automates it. It gathers data from many different places and many different public APIs and produces this gorgeous markdown document that you can see on the right. A huge shout out to Typora. Typora is a markdown editor that you can see there, and it just makes any markdown look stunning. In the morning, Journal will grab yesterday's journal entry, look for any to-dos that haven't been checked, like the second checkbox here, the consider upgrading the database, and carries them forward into today. It will also go to the GitLab API and grab pull requests or merge requests, depending on how you talk about them, and look for my own pull requests, my team's pull requests, or any pull request in a broad space of about 20 repos that me and my team are responsible for. And it will pull them in, give me the title and the author and a direct link to it. And lastly, the bottom thing, the open tasks, it goes off to our issue tracker, which I really, really dislike because it doesn't support Markdown. And it grabs all the tasks that me and my team have in progress right now. And it puts it all together in a Markdown file that's just stored on my laptop. All of this I could do myself. Like, there's no need. You can probably subscribe to emails, or you could just crawl through all of these tools and just get the information. But Journal is just so diligent. It doesn't forget a repo. It doesn't forget a to-do because it might be a chore or tedious. And it goes to all of our issue trackers, even if we use multiple boards. And just that level of diligence is just really, really practical. What makes Journal special in my book is just the centricity of Markdown. It's the file format I use to save everything. It's just beautiful to look at in a good editor or in Vim, which you can see in the bottom left. And it's trivial to share. If my teammate needs one of these because it has some interesting notes or a relevant to-do, I could just drag it into Dropbox or even into Slack, and it will just send it and it's fine. There's no proprietary format or anything like that. Markdown did drive most of my technology choices because there was exactly one library in Node that I really wanted to use that treats my entire Markdown like a tree, and it just makes selecting and mutating it very, very easy. After that, I had to stick to Node anyway, so I found a really cool project called Nexe, N-E-X-E, which will take the Node runtime and all of my code and just bundle it up in a binary. So if I do decide to share this, or if I want to set up a second laptop, I can just take one blob, drop it in, and I can run it again without having to worry about which Node version is running where. And lastly, to put into context how much I use Journal, I checked the other day, and when I made my slides, I had about 195 Journal entries dating back the last 16, 18 months. By now, I should have crossed the 200 threshold, and they're all there ready for me to look at when I need them. The next tool in this myself column, which you can see at the top right, is Probe. Probe is a little quote, quote, database to keep track of interesting pull requests or GitHub issues. This was really centered in how our team operates, because as the platform team, we run a lot of Terraform code, and we're very dependent on features of Terraform and Terraform providers. As such, we keep tabs on certain pull requests that we're interested in. And yeah, we just see when updates come through. You might wonder why I didn't, again, just opt for emails. You can hit the little bell icon on a GitHub issue or a pull request, and you'll be notified on your email box whenever something happens. But Probe basically inverts the dependency. Instead of me being bombarded with emails that I may or may not care about at some random point, I just choose when I want to see updates. I will run probe ls, which you can see in the top right, and it will go off, fetch some updates, and then just display them. Because it picks the title and the link, some of these issues are really long, so I had to zoom out a lot to get like Probe to display nicely. What's really cool about Probe is its focus on just being very centered onto my own laptop. Like Journal, it stores all files in the JSON database, which you can see at the bottom. I just didn't feel like fiddling with a SQLite database or with Postgres or anything else, credentials and all that faff, just for the simple act of storing a blob. This doesn't need to handle concurrency. This doesn't need to handle thousands of users. So a simple JSON blob that you see at the bottom handles this just perfectly. As an added feature, I can just open it in Vim, edit whatever I need to change in case something crashes, and that's perfectly acceptable. Finally, I was super curious how the GraphQL API of GitHub works in Go. I wanted to learn how those two mix together. So probe is written in Go, and it's been an utter joy to do it. It's been really fun to write it. I've marked probe as myself, even though my teammate who couldn't make it today has tried to run probe on his machine. But in very classic fashion for the tools that I write for myself, it just crashed on his laptop. I think there was some issue with the lack of config, but that demonstrates that for tools that I write to myself, I'm not really fussed about fancy error handling or making this the most pleasant experience for anybody else, because it's just meant to run for a little and then, cease when the need is gone. The next tool helped me to overcome a nuisance. So we were tasked by our client to please tag every commit that we do against our work repos with the proper issue ID from our issue tracker to essentially link our code to the issue tracker. Now, I've said it before, I really dislike our issue tracker because it's fairly slow and has no markdown. And we had to deal with multiple boards. So we had multiple places, multiple sources to check for work. Furthermore, we run about 15, maybe 20 repos that are distributed. And we tend to work on multiple things at a time because of the nature of how we do it. So it was really tedious to remember which issue ID goes against which repo when I do what commits, and heaven forbid, if my work interleaves, I need to remember this little bit of work goes against one issue ID and this other one against another one. And that was just super, super tedious. So in an act of defiance, I decided I'm going to write myself a little tool in Rust, that story. You can tell already that it's a bit nicer because the help that it prints at least has nice colors. And what story can do is when you type story select, like in the top right screenshot, it will go off to our issue tracker via its public API, fetch all of the stories that we currently have in progress, present a really nice fuzzy finder, let you type, for example, tags, and it will highlight that story. You can hit enter, and it will write that issue ID to the file. So that's repo specific. It comes with a Git hook that will prefix every commit you make in the future with that issue ID. So you can see at the bottom right, my Git where I'm committing for this PT341 story. And this makes it really easy to just figure out what story I'm on. I can do it exactly when I'm working in a repo. I don't have to leave to the browser or deal with it. And it will remember it until I choose to change my mind. And that's really, really practical. I was really keen to write Rust, so this was really fun to experiment with the newest libraries that come out in Rust, like that fuzzy selector or like async Rust and request and serve. So this was really a way for me to get a little bit of joy out of something that I considered a really annoying nuisance. Again, could I have done this by just going to the browser? Sure. But along the way, I learned a lot of fun Rust and gained this little utility. Now we upgrade into the area that's my team, which is in the top right in purple. And this tool is called SecHub, and it's named after the AWS product that it manages, AWS Security Hub. For those of you that don't know, Security Hub is meant to run on all of your AWS accounts, and it will look for certain configuration patterns and flag the ones that it considers not best practice. So it has these controls. And it's important to know that it has about 115 controls scattered around the plethora of services they have. And on our client, we have about 25 to 30 AWS accounts in 17 regions, and we have to choose to enable each one of these 115 accounts per region, per control. So if you do a little bit of math, that's about 60 1,000 controls that we need to turn on, off, depending on various parameters. So we joked that we could do this with a shell script and a little bit of AWS CLI. And that joke evolved into, why wouldn't we write this in Go? And suddenly me and my teammate were happily writing this in Go. The reason we had to do it ourselves is that sadly, Terraform at that point didn't support this specific resource. We believe they do by now, or there are at least pull requests somewhere, but we're quite happy with our own setup. So what made SecHub a my team tool as opposed to just Felipe's myself tool? First and foremost, me and my teammate spoke a lot about how to work the interface, how to work the configuration file, and you could kind of see it evolving here. On the left screenshot, it's kind of hard to tell, but it uses the lingo of Terraform, of plan and apply. You can see on the right screenshot where it's running, we use the same sort of diff notation of minus when something needs to be disabled, like RDS.23 in this screenshot, or plus if we were going to turn something on. And we debated a lot about the proper structure for our config files. Since SecHub has been rewritten 2, 3, maybe even 4 times, and it has evolved always with our growing needs as a team. The configuration is 100% kept in the repo itself, as opposed to my own tools, which write to my home directory and pollute it there. This makes it really easy for anyone in our team to pick up the latest configuration, make some adjustments, and update Security Hub in a holistic way. SecHub, as opposed to other tools, actually has a build file so that it's easy to set up. The code is linted. The code is even tested, which I can't say for my own personal tools. And that just makes the entire experience for the team quite neat to operate and modify and grow SecHub. The last tidbit is that updating the 60,000 controls at a time is pretty slow, especially when you do it sequentially. So we have one file called concurrency.go, where we just pooled our entire Go concurrency knowledge and came up with a pattern that sped it up to about 3 minutes as opposed to taking 20 minutes. And that was really a fun experiment and learning about Go and Go concurrency patterns. The next tool is just lovingly called ToolChain. And this one mixes the space between my team, so it's written for me and my colleagues, and everyone else, so a broader set of teams on our client account. ToolChain helped to automate some pretty mundane steps that were necessary to get to work in the first place. So it started very centric on my own team. Over time, I've shared this tool with my friends and colleagues, so it has had to evolve and grow to encompass everyone else's needs. You can tell from the screenshot on the left that it supports a lot of subcommands. I'm just going to focus on a couple that have almost historic significance. The first command we ever wrote is env, which is somewhere in the middle. Env is there to create AWS credentials for you. You can see it running on the screenshot on the right. And if you're worried about those credentials being now recorded to Zoom, these get killed about every hour or maybe every other hour. So these are outdated by a few days. What env will do, well, before we had the toolchain and env, we had to go to the SSO landing page, pick one of our 30 accounts, pick one of our 5 to 6 roles, depending on what job we needed to do, pick the API credentials from there, copy, go back to our terminal, paste, run whatever experimental command we needed to run to explore or maybe run Terraform, and then repeat again for any subsequent account that we needed to operate on. And you can imagine, while totally possible and even fairly easy to describe in 15, 20 seconds, this was super tedious if you had to operate across a huge range of accounts. I've learned by now that a lot of this can be handled by using -- profile on the AWS CLI, but other tools don't, so it's quite practical to still have this around. So what made this a team effort as opposed to any of the, or like what made this a team to everyone else effort? First and foremost, this is 90% shell scripts and a little dash of Python, which makes it totally easy for anyone to plop it open, look at the shell scripts, figure out what they want to change, maybe even get inspired to like copy paste a chunk out and run it in a separate script, and then close it back down. Errors are fairly trivial. The shell will usually pretty loudly yell at you when something is missing or it wants more parameters. So it's very easy as an operator to run these scripts. We've tried to provide as much support as we can for the end user without us or me and my team having to be there. You can see the helpful tabulated messages on the left screenshot, and these carry through. We use the same kind of table to give you help for each individual command. And we even provide an install and update script that checks for certain dependencies and lets you know that you need to install some specific tool in some specific version. There are a couple of luxury scripts in here as well, like it can go to one login or one password for us. With SSM, you can connect to our Bastion host in the different environments. And it even has one of my personal favorites, web. You can see the screenshot at the bottom, DP web S3 platform dev, which will open the S3 console for the platform development account in your browser immediately logged in. And you can replace S3 with whatever you want, EC2 for the compute, or maybe ECS if you run Docker Fargate, and any of those scripts are totally supported, and that makes it super nice. In a Go rewrite that I've done of ToolChain since, it even supports tab completion, and that's the ultimate luxury. The last tool I want to talk about is in this fair and square in the everyone else category, and it breaks my talk title a little bit. Yes, it's a command line. You can see from the screenshots, but it's not really run by any human user. It stretches my metaphor a little bit. DDEvent stands for Datadog events, and all it does is send events off to Datadog with some subject, a title, a subject, a body, and some tags. And we use this in CI to notify of merges or deployments or approvals and other kinds of events that happen in CI. What made this tool different than all the other ones? We immediately jumped to Go. We had collected some experience writing SecHub, so we just thought, rather than doing a complicated shell script, we'll write it in Go. We'll compile one binary that is static, meaning it has no external dependencies and can just be copy pasted anywhere. And that just made running it a total breeze. It's very interesting to me that the users are mostly computers, not humans. So we didn't bother with a lot of help to the user, but had a fairly decent README that human operators could code into their pipelines, like you can see at the bottom right, and then just walk away. And this just gets set up once, run forever, and like there's very, very little interaction with it. It's really write, deploy, and forget. And finally, it uses a lot of environment variables as opposed to flags, because in CI, all of those get set up beforehand by other tools. And that just makes the entire experience quite easy. So at this point, we get to my infinite command line wisdom. It really isn't, but I've really used hyperbole so far, and I just wanted to stick to it. The first thing, and I think this is my most important slide, is that it's way more fun to be a pirate than join the Navy. Writing tools that support your work as opposed to being your work product itself is really, really great. No one cares if those work things fail. It's just for you. There's no outside influence. With these little tools, as I've sort of alluded to a couple of times, you can break the monotony of a project. Maybe your project is just entering a phase where it's all about building on the front end. So you spend a lot of time in React and CSS, and you just feel like trying something else. Maybe you want to write some Go, or maybe you were curious about some Rust at some point. You can use any stack, and it just doesn't need to be blessed. Like your team doesn't need to approve that you write this tool in Python using Neo4j, because it's not going to go out there. It's just for you. Building something that has no deadlines, no sprints, no issue trackers, no users other than yourself, allows you to start and stop whenever you want. Maybe your script got to be practical, it solved your problem, and it does so faithfully. So you can stop there. You don't need to deal with all these kinds of error conditions or whatever. It's just hacky and it's yours. As I said before, SecHub was written in defiance because we said, oh, we joke about Go and we're going to use it and it's going to be fine. So I think this is the most important message of my talk. If you're in a rut, if you feel a bit stuck, if it feels repetitive, figure out what you can write and just hack away on something completely different than your day-to-day work. It's really liberating. So what kind of things can you hack on? And my maybe counterintuitive suggestion is that anything that's repetitive, mundane, is a perfect candidate for such a little automation tool. Think about the tools that we've looked at before. Could I have gone to GitLab, our issue tracker, and some to-do task to just figure out my day in the morning? Of course I can. But this is super repetitive. I run this every day. So it was perfect to sort of capture that moment. Things that are annoying are great as well. Could we as a team have gone to each individual account, logged in, get our credentials, paste them back into the terminal? Of course we can. But if I can solve that into a script that runs in 5 seconds, it just takes away that paper cut. These tools that sort of solve the repetitive mundane have a fairly limited audience though. Things that are repetitive and mundane to me, you may not even notice, or they might not even be your cup of tea. Not everyone needs to run journal just because I feel like it's effective for my day-to-day. Expanding some of these tools to grow them and cover your colleagues, and then maybe even beyond that, everyone else on the account is an entirely different ballgame. ToolChain, when it started, solved a very specific problem that was shared by many people. Everyone on this account that needed to interact with AWS needed to sort of deal with this annoying logging in and getting credentials. And that made it quite appealing to other people. So it's interesting and important to tell the difference between a genuine pain point like ToolChain versus a pet peeve that is specifically there to avoid some nuisance, like I did with Story or with Journal. When you do get to the point of sharing your brand new supershell script with the world, be mindful. ToolChain version 1 was great. Just those shell scripts and everyone was happy to use them. When it crashed, people kind of knew what to do because they knew they could just open it and look at it. If a parameter was missing, they could fix it themselves. ToolChain version 2 hasn't gone further than my own laptop, and it's written in Go. And the reason I don't like to share it is the second it crashes for any reason, just outright panics. And if you're lucky, you get a stack trace. And that's an experience that's okay for me, but may not be what other people expect from a tool they're receiving. Widely shared tools really need good error messages, especially when you can't just sort of look under the hood and see what the shell script is doing. Tools that did succeed in being used by a wide audience came with scripts to install them, scripts to update them, had decent errors, like they would tell you what you were supposed to do. And these really make awesome, useful tools. So when sharing, beware about expectations. What you believe to be a minimal lovable product may not be the same for everyone else. So you will face some criticism, I'm sure. And keep in mind that while we do welcome feedback, and please do so, not all feedback, too much feedback can be overwhelming, particularly when it's not all positive and you get it sort of piled into your GitHub issues. Things that you can do to deal with this is, for example, put in a link to the issue template on GitHub. I think that's a really brilliant feature where you can click it when your tool crashes, and it will automatically take you to the right forum with the right structure to sort of put down any issues that you found. There are other techniques to embedding support. It's really tricky, but tab completion just makes it so that people can't do the wrong thing, which is amazing. You can restructure your command line to be a bit more interactive, where it will ask you information and then sort of guide you through, which again makes it harder for things to go wrong. And lastly, keep in mind, you can't control everyone's environment. I feel like it was a risk to write the ToolChain shell scripts, because as I learned, not everyone uses the same bash, the same ZSH, or maybe there's a team member with fish, and all of these are compatible, but with slight nuances. Maybe someone is running a different Node version or a different Python version. So when I intend to share publicly and widely, I'll prefer tools that bundle the whole experience into one binary. Maybe it's Go, maybe it's even Rust. So let's move on to an extra grouping that I sort of took out of my title, which is the Abandonware pile. This is where things go missing, tools that I've thought of or announced or even talking to with my teammates, but really then just abandoned within a few days. They're definitely written off. This category is still very interesting. There's plenty to learn about like what failed and why, and sort of what makes good and bad tooling. And this is a treasure trove for the future. Circumstances change. Maybe you learn about a new library that solves a tricky part of your problem and that just bootstraps you again. Or maybe like in the state of story, the problem just goes away, but it could come back to a different client where you need to deal with that sort of issue tracker in your Git kind of a thing. So this abandonware pile is quite interesting. And I have two lessons here that we're going to look at. So the first one, fairly obvious, don't bite off more than you can chew. A tiny decent script should be helpful within a few days, maybe 1 to 3, to throw an arbitrary number out there. Even if it involves glitches or maybe hard coding things, or maybe it has a clunky UI or the config is really difficult. But as long as you get it working and get some value out of it, the tool will survive, and you can come back to it and modify and improve anything you want along the way. An example of where I tried to bite off way more than I should have was a tool that I thought of for our CI that should skip tests and other like steps when the inputs hadn't changed. This sounds easy enough, but you immediately walk into the caching problem, which is notoriously hard. And then you still need to think about things like, How do I figure out things have changed? How do I ship this out of my CI pipeline so I can bring it back later? How do I get it back? How do I make sure it hasn't been tampered with? How do I make this thing idempotent? And all of the above. So I don't know what the smallest step is that I can get this done in maybe 1 to 3 days in a shell script, but I still think about it all the time. But like the ask is just impossibly big. So there's no way I can quickly solve this and sort of hack it through. The next lesson I've called the intractable Rube Goldberg machines. These are ideas for tools that don't really solve a very specific hard problem, like logging in, like my morning routine, like putting in the issue tracker ID when I commit, but machines and scripts that potentially may contain something interesting. My example for this was being very frustrated with some of our AWS resources, particularly the ones that are scattered across accounts and get interconnected. So my simple plan was enumerate every single resource that we own on AWS, interconnect all of the dependencies, dump all of that into a Neo4j graph database, learn about graph algorithms, visualize the whole thing. And when we get there, maybe there's an interesting pattern. Maybe there's a circle I can see, or maybe there's a grouping or a clustering. I don't know. But I need to climb this entire mountain and bubble all of these thoughts first before I can get any kind of value out of this. This died because the problem is just huge and intractable, and the benefit of going through this ordeal just didn't outweigh sort of the effort I had to put in. But I keep this one close because all of these individual problems might be solved by libraries down the line. I'm still hoping that someone writes a library in any language to enumerate all of AWS. I'm following a couple of projects that hopefully do this. But these kind of tools, I tend to abandon them. They're a great idea, but just way too big. So we're getting towards the end. So my closing message with the fox that I stole from @foxesinlove on Twitter: go have fun with these tools. I certainly had, even though I didn't write all of them. Enjoy writing your scripts and share your experiences, be it by sharing the tools with your teammates and your friends, or by mentioning me on Twitter on @Felipe Seré with questions or ideas, or maybe you just want to show up what you've built recently.